Hello, good afternoon. This is BBC News with me, Ben Brown. Our headlines at 2 o'clock. Insiders tell the BBC that lockdown parties in Downing Street were routine. They say gatherings were common during the pandemic and that staff felt they were permissible because the Prime Minister often popped in.
He wasn't there saying this shouldn't be happening. He wasn't saying, can everyone break up and go home? Can everyone socially distance? Can everyone put masks on? No, he wasn't telling anybody that. He was grabbing a glass for himself.
The energy regulator Ofgem says the price cap is expected to reach £2,800 this October. That's an increase of more than £800 on the current cap. Thousands of photographs are uncovered from the heart of China's highly secretive system of incarceration of Uyghurs and other minorities. It includes evidence of a shoot-to-kill policy. The murder of 3-year-old Kamani Watson-Darby. His mother's boyfriend is jailed for at least 24 years after subjecting the toddler to weeks of beatings. And West Ham defender Kurt Zouma pleads guilty to kicking and slapping a cat, admitting 2 offences under the Animal Welfare Act. Hello, good afternoon. Speaking for the first time, insiders who attended gatherings in Downing Street during COVID lockdowns have told BBC News that they would arrive at work to find bins overflowing with empty bottles from the night before, and that parties were routine. They say staff sat on each other's laps at a leaving do in November 2020, where the Prime Minister has now been pictured, and that security guards were laughed at when they tried to stop one party from taking place. Well, Boris Johnson is facing fresh questions about his attendance at the leaving party, and the Metropolitan Police are facing calls to explain why the Prime Minister was not issued with a fine. Our political correspondent, Ben Wright, has the latest developments.
Boozy, lockdown-breaking parties in Downing Street have led to more than 100 fines and big questions for Boris Johnson. With No.10 braced for the official report into the Partygate scandal, Panorama has spoken to 3 insiders who attended lockdown gatherings in No.10. Their words are spoken by actors.
What was it sometimes like the morning after?
A mess. There were bottles, empties, rubbish, in the bin but overflowing. Or indeed sometimes left on the table.
You would go into work in the morning in 10 Downing Street and find empty bottles littered around the place.
Yep.
For the first time, people who were there describe what the culture was like.
They were every week. The event invites for Friday press office drinks were just nailed into the diary.
There were actually invites. There was a weekly regular invite to press office drinks on Friday nights.
Yes, Wine Time Fridays. Invites that were in everyone's calendar for every Friday at 4 p.m.
At 4 o'clock in the afternoon was wine time.
Yes.
2 of the people who've spoken to the BBC on condition of anonymity have received fines for attending events that broke the law. One staffer said they felt Boris Johnson had given permission for the events to take place because of his attendance.
He was there. He may have just been popping through on the way to his flat because that's what would happen. You know, he wasn't there saying this shouldn't be happening. He wasn't saying, can everyone break up and go home? Can everyone socially distance? Can everyone put masks on? No, he wasn't telling anybody that. He was grabbing a glass for himself.
He was certainly at this gathering. Pictures released by ITV News show the Prime Minister at a leaving party in November 2020. At least one person who attended the event was fined, but Boris Johnson was not. A staffer who was there described the do.
There was about 30 people, if not more, in a room. Everyone was stood shoulder to shoulder. Some people on each other's laps.
People were sitting on each other's laps?
Yes, 1 or 2 people.
A government source said the Prime Minister attended that event in a work capacity, a message repeated by ministers this morning.
He probably was coming out of his office, carried the red boxes in, raised a glass to say thank you to a leaving member of staff who he would have been working with closely all the way through, and then presumably left, and the police will have had all of that information, which is why they didn't issue him a fixed penalty notice in this case.
Unemployment is now down to its lowest level since 1974.
At Cabinet this morning, Boris Johnson was talking about the latest job figures, but his own conduct in office caused disbelief, in the words of one staffer, when the Prime Minister first told Parliament there were no parties.
So when you and your colleagues in government saw Boris Johnson say none of the rules had been broken,
we were watching it all live and we just sort of looked at each other in disbelief, like, why? Why is he denying this? When we've been with him this entire time, we knew that the rules had been broken. We knew these parties happened.
The government has declined to respond to the testimony given to Panorama. The Prime Minister has promised to make a statement to Parliament as soon as the Sue Gray report is published. Now the Met's investigation is over, Labour's London Mayor says the police have some explaining to do.
I've, not asked questions about this. I've kept away from this. But I think it's important when it comes to trust and confidence, when it comes to policing by consent, when it comes to questions being asked about the integrity of an investigation, that the police explain why they've reached the conclusions they have.
And Boris Johnson will soon have to explain to MPs and voters how all these gatherings were allowed to happen and who, if anyone, should take responsibility. Ben Wright, BBC News, Westminster.
Let's talk to our political correspondent, Damien Grammaticus, who joins us now from Westminster as well. Damien, does all of this new testimony ratchet up the pressure further on Boris Johnson, do you think?
I think it does, Ben. I think it certainly focuses in on this really central question now, which is what we are coming to, which is the question of, did Boris Johnson knowingly mislead Parliament? The first thing we're going to get is the Sue Gray report coming, we're told, imminently in the next few days, this week, it's believed. That may well include more of this sort of detail, but the sort of really, I think, important point for Boris Johnson is going to be, how does this land with his own MPs? And we've been hearing today some of them very troubled by what they've seen here. So some who've not been fans of Boris Johnson for a long time coming out, like Dominic Grieve, former Conservative MP. He said, it's time for Conservative MPs to say enough is enough. Others defending him, as you heard from cabinet ministers. But the question really focuses, I think, or is going to focus in on that, what Boris Johnson told Parliament when he said that he was asked about the 13th of November, the image that we saw yesterday when he was at that party, and he told Parliament, did a party take place? No, he said, the guidance was followed, the rules were followed at all times. Here we have someone describing that party and someone describing hearing the Prime Minister say that to Parliament and being, they said, very shocked by that. So that's going to be the focus that MPs in their inquiry that will follow Sue Gray will look at. Did Boris Johnson knowingly mislead Parliament? What will the weight of all of this evidence add to those questions about the Prime Minister's truthfulness, what he said about the events, the fact he's pictured at events, people here, staff are saying he was there, he would be passing and come in and take part and raise a glass, not tell people to go home. All of those will feed into the next few days.
OK, Damien, thank you very much indeed. And we can also talk to our Home Affairs correspondent, Daniel Sandford, who's here with me as well, because, Daniel, the Prime Minister's under pressure, but the police, to an extent, are under pressure as well to say more about their investigation, in particular why we've seen that picture of the Prime Minister, raising a glass, toasting the staff there, but not being fined for that particular event. Police being asked for an explanation, but they won't give it.
No, I mean, not only has he not been fined for that event, but other people who were present at that event were fined. And people are starting to say, well, we need to understand why that is. And Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, went on the radio this morning and said that he believes that the police now need to give an explanation. The problem for the police is that they feel that if they start to give more detail about how they reach these decisions, that risks identifying people that have been given fixed penalty notices. And under the national guidelines, they must not identify anyone who's been given a fixed penalty notice. So that puts them in quite a difficult position. Many people are arguing that they should be able to give at least some more explanation, them feeling that they can't. The best kind of guess we have at the moment is that they've made a decision that to have a quick drink at the end of the day when somebody's leaving on their last day, it's kind of only human to say thanks, goodbye and make a short speech, and that perhaps the Prime Minister has fitted in the category of doing something that was short and fitted into the working day and was therefore necessary for work purposes. But anyone who stayed on for much longer for a long drinking session, that they have opened themselves up to fine. Essentially, the event has gone from being a arguably legal event to one that is clearly in breach of the COVID guidelines, and that's the best explanation we can give. We don't really know, and it would take someone to refuse to pay their fine for the case to end up in court, for the police to then actually outline their reasoning in court for us to really find out.
And could anybody force them to explain more? I mean, for example, you mentioned the Mayor of London and his criticisms earlier on. I mean, he has oversight over the Metropolitan Police.
Yeah, the police are in quite a difficult position now with the Mayor of London, because the last time the Mayor of London got quite critical about how they were acting, it ended up with Dame Cressida Dick, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, feeling that she had to resign. She'd essentially lost the confidence of the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. So the police will be very aware that when Sadiq Khan goes on the radio and says, I think the police should explain themselves, that they need to pay attention. But whether they can actually feel that what he has said allows them to breach their decision, which they don't want to explain more for the risk of identifying people, I'm not really sure. And certainly at this point, there's no sign of them giving any further explanation.
All right, Daniel, thank you very much. Daniel Sandford, our Home Affairs correspondent. Well, speaking to BBC Radio 4's World at One programme today, Laura Kuenssberg, who we saw in that report a little earlier on, reflected on the experience of those involved in COVID lockdown parties in Downing Street and Whitehall.
I think some people who've been caught up in this, who aren't asking for sympathy about their own behaviour, but I think there is a sense of injustice actually among some of them. Some of them feel not just embarrassed but also quite hurt. And one of our insiders told us that, you know, junior staff felt at the time they weren't breaking the rules because their bosses were there, and not just sometimes the Prime Minister, but also senior civil servants who are, I think, some of them in for a pretty rough ride from Sue Gray too tomorrow. And yet these younger staffers then find out that what they were doing was against the law. And the way that this is all playing out, there is, I think, a sense of hurt and confusion. They feel that they were promised that they would be protected. One of them said they felt Boris Johnson was throwing staff under the bus. Another used the phrase witch hunt in terms of junior staffers, some of whom have received multiple fines. And I think that's been exacerbated by what's happened about that party that Boris Johnson was pictured at yesterday, with some of those present were fined, but the Prime Minister himself was not. Now, of course, there's an angry, complicated political debate about the justice of all of this, the fairness of all of this, and Boris Johnson's facing questions from his own MPs about his own involvement. We know that. But definitely, for some of those in Whitehall who lived through all of this, both working in the Cabinet Office in Downing Street during this period, and who have lived with it in the previous months by having to sit down with Sue Gray and explain what they were up to, or receiving police fines, as two of our three insiders have that we spoke to for this programme. It's a very sorry episode, and while they are sorry, I get the sense, for what they did, they do not necessarily feel that the consequences are playing out in an equal way.
Laura Kuenssberg there. Well, Mike